Welcome to this non-duality live talk. I enjoy doing these live talks because then I'm able to interact with other people with questions. It's a little bit more dynamic than just talking to the camera here. So I guess, according to YouTube, you're supposed to hook someone within the first 30 seconds of the video. So if you're not going to be joining live and you're watching this after the fact, we're going to be talking about non-duality, obviously, but also the idea that logically non-duality is the ultimate truth compared to duality. So duality is not real. So we'll dive into that. But the thing I like about live talks is I don't have to worry about getting it right and polishing it. It can just be it is what it is. So because I just started this last week doing 90-second non-duality videos where I have to talk about basically one main idea in each of the videos. So that's the whole premise of it. And it can be difficult when talking about these things to really try to wrap everything up in 90 seconds, but I feel like it's helpful in the sense that if you're a busy person and you enjoy watching videos, to sit here and watch a whole 30-minute, 45-minute live stream, it's good for a while, but it's just you can only do so much. So that's why I like when I went through A Course in Miracles a handful of years ago, they the workbook for that it's 365 lessons, so you do it every day. And I like that because it kind of has a structure. It creates a habit. It's easy to, once you get into it and you stick with it for a period of time, I think habits after so many weeks will be instilled. So for me, I was able to do it consistently every day for a year, where I think some people sometimes maybe do it, take a couple days off here and there, and that's fine. But for me, I liked the fact that it was every day and it was short lessons versus, taking long stints of time. And it's the morning here. I already woke up and did my morning yoga, and I walked around the forest and picked wild berries. And I came home and made my avocado toast and my homemade coffee. What else did I do? Nothing, I guess, because that's what non-dual people do. They don't do anything. But I'm obviously just kind of being a little facetious, because sometimes you hear the message of non-duality and it's wrapped in this idea that I had an epiphany. I get it. I understand non-duality, and now my life is forever changed and everything's wonderful and blissful, and that can seem to happen, or it doesn't happen, because in that case it's all about you. And so if you're watching a video and your idea of someone getting it is someone sitting cross-legged or staring doe-eyed into the camera, or not showing emotion and seeming like, yes, talking quietly, whatever you perceive as being somehow enlightened is what you're going to be drawn to and want to try to emulate or try to become. And that in itself, when in talking about non-duality, your enlightenment can become a trap in a sense. And otherwise, now with the age of the internet and videos like this, people can share their lives in an Instagram style where they show you, all the wonderful things about their life and how it's so peaceful and calm and all of that. And I think if you want to get a lot of viewers on YouTube, non-duality probably isn't the subject to talk about. And if you're if you're a guy, it's probably making videos with your dog, or doing a workout video with your shirt off, or if, for women, it's probably, if you want to get a lot of viewers, doing yoga and like your stuff you go to bed in, and things like that, because that's what people are attracted to, and that's what they desire. And so either they want to be like you, or they want to, they desire to have you, and that sort of thing. So that's human nature. So that's why I like the live talk, because then it's just I'm in a sense I'm forced to just basically speak how I speak, and in the moment talk, and that's for me more enjoyable, to just come out and talk versus to have to make a video that someone finds value in some form or another in order to grow my YouTube channel. And the whole purpose at this point, I guess my goal would be to get to 1,000 subscribers, so then I can do more live videos where I don't have to rely on a laptop, because YouTube makes you have 1,000 followers in order to be able to use your mobile device to go live. And I like making videos when it's nice outside in areas that I find more or can be more at peace and that sort of thing. Like I like going to the forest. I like water. Obviously, if you've watched any of my videos, you probably noticed that. Some of my more recent videos. So today we're going to talk a little bit about non-duality versus duality, but I want to say hi to Daryl, who is here joining us today. Daryl says, would you say that you have an intellectual understanding of non-duality, or have had an experience of it both? As I cough here. I think as far as an intellectual understanding of non-duality, I have it as like the most basic form of it, because anytime you try to overanalyze non-duality, then you're just going down the same path of everything else in life. Because non-duality just simply means not two. And so what ends up happening, so reality is not separate, it's not two, but what does that mean? And so then what that does a lot of times for the thinking mind, the intellectual mind, is it comes up with all these questions of, well, okay, yeah, so what about this? Or yes, but whatever, fill in the question. So if you say, reality is not two, well, but I see things as duality, I see myself as other and self. So if I perceive myself in that way, how can you say that there's not two when I believe it is? So isn't our sense of reality ultimately true, because I can't see non-duality? Those types of questions. And that's where a lot of talks that non-dual speakers, especially some of the ones that do it more often in front of groups, is you get a lot of the same questions or similar questions, or ultimately the same question coming from the perspective of the separate self. And so the answer is always basically the same, but the mind, what it does is there's always another way, there's always another door, there's always another path to take. And so in one moment, if you have some sort of like sense of awakeness or enlightenment or epiphany, what the mind does is it takes that understanding and twists it and comes up with some other way to try to understand it and try to ask another question. So in one moment, if there's a sense of knowing or understanding, that moment oftentimes will pass because the mind comes in and tries to claim the understanding, tries to say, well, this is for me, this is something I can use or something I can take advantage of or find benefit from through this understanding. Whereas in my the way I see non-duality is more, it's more of kind of a pointing to or a recognition of the inherent fault or the inherent game or the mind trick that the intellectual mind makes on a constant basis. And so the mind wants to try to understand something, wants to try to objectify something and make it real and make it solid, make it something that you can believe in. And so non-duality is kind of that jujitsu move or the the judo move to try to dodge that sort of thinking. And so it's from that perspective, it's not so much that having an intellectual understanding is necessarily important. It's nice to have non-duality be something that you are introduced to, but for many people, if you're introduced to non-duality, it ends up not meaning anything or not really having any value, and so it kind of gets disregarded. If you're open to non-duality, if you're going through situations where you're having an existential crisis, or you are kind of fed up with everything seems to work, you're always failing with trying to go from this thing to that thing to this belief system to this spiritual practice to try to find some sort of peace or joy or whatever word you want to say, bliss, then non-duality is something that is a concept that can be presented to you as a separate self that you won't understand specifically, but in a sense, it opens you up to the idea that everything's kind of a lot of BS. I'll get into that a little bit later. But as far as having an experience of non-duality, I think it's one of those things where, there's a lot of, if you talk about peeling back the onion, there's a lot of layers to our perception and our beliefs and who we are, how we see ourselves. And there are moments where some of those kind of fall away, and everything is seen through a lens of non-duality. But for me, in those moments, looking back, because you can only describe it with words, and words always seem to fail to try to explain it. It's the sense that in those moments of non-dual experience, there's a recognition that this is how it always is, this is how it always has been and always will be. And so trying to have a non-dual experience is kind of like trying to seek the golden goose, trying to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, or whatever other myth you want to use. But it's just the idea that you're trying to find some sort of non-dual experience, and then not even just have a non-dual experience, but to have it forever and all time. And I think in those moments of experience, if you want to call it that, I think the recognition is that what you're chasing is a carrot that doesn't really exist, and you are what you've been looking for. If you want to, just to quote Paul Hederman, he uses that line a lot. So should have done more, goat yoga this morning, then my throat would be clear. So today, what I wanted to talk about is this idea of duality versus non-duality, one being the ultimate truth and one being an illusion or unreal or fake. And I think probably the simplest way to try to explain it is non-duality includes duality and not the other way around. And so duality tries to exclude non-duality, and that's what makes it false. So in other words, duality is oftentimes is understood or thought about in the sense that there are things and there are not no things. So things exist, separation ultimately exists, and the idea that there is no separation is not true. That's kind of the premise of duality, saying that there is always a separation. And so like SAND, the Science and Non-Duality Institute, they oftentimes, you watch any of their videos, they'll talk about the science behind trying to prove non-duality. And ultimately, non-duality can't be proven, but it can be thought of theoretically in a sense that it seems to be true. And so if you were to try and disprove duality from a rational, intellectual, logical standpoint, you would do things like talk about quantum theory, or try to get to what is at the center of an atom, if you will. So, you can say, okay, well, we've got this material, which is made up of molecules, which is made up of atoms, and then you've got the electrons, protons, neutrons, and you've got the quarks and everything else from there. But if you look at that type of science, you've got vast spaces of nothingness, and then in the center of that is a nucleus, and then within that is vast nothingness. So like if you talk about the mass of an atom, it's like a tiny little speck in a whole giant football field, essentially. So most of it's empty space, and so that's kind of pointing to the idea that nothing exists. But then people can say, well, ultimately there is some sort of particle at the end of that, and that's where you get into quantum physics and stuff, talking about waves versus particles and the observer and that whole thing. But the whole idea of science trying to disprove duality is by trying to find those types of aspects, or looking at the interpersonal or interpersonal workings and saying that the separation is a perception and ultimately not real, which is a fine task to try to a path to go down, but ultimately you're trying to convince something that will never be convinced of what you're trying to say. And so you can say all day that the ultimate core of our being is empty, but we'll never believe that, because there's always going to be a question as to, well, that's just a belief, that's just some scientist, that's a study, or I understand the science, but I don't really believe it, or why does it have value for my life? So you won't really believe that duality is untrue. And so non-duality is saying that there is no separation in a sense, or that there is no two. And so anything that is seen as being two is in appearance or is unreal. And so what ends up happening is people see, or they end up separating out duality versus non-duality. So then non-duality becomes a thing that's separate than the thing of duality. And so one has to be true and one has to be false. But the reason why I'm trying to logically argue that non-duality is true and duality is an illusion is that non-duality contains duality. So duality is within non-duality. And what I mean by that is the premise that nothing is two. If you try to intellectually separate duality from non-duality, that becomes a separate concept, or that in your mind it becomes two. And so what non-duality is saying, that is not true, that is an illusion. And so that kind of, in a way, even though you'll never be comfortable or appeased by this, it fixes this dilemma that, well, I'm a separate person. I feel I have, I feel the five senses: touch, taste, sound, sight, all that. And so I see myself as being separate. I have this perception of being a self versus other. That is what I perceive. So then, are you saying that that's not true? And non-duality is saying, well, yes, it's true, but it's not true in a sense. Oh boy. Because like as a self, we see ourselves in certain ways. So I see this hand as being mine. I see my thoughts as mine, but ultimately, you can see past that. If I were to lose my hand, the hand would be over there, and that's no longer me. And so it's really just a concept of who you believe yourself to be. And a lot of it's based in the body, body awareness and that sort of thing. Can the mind be separate from the body? That's a great question to ask in that regard. But when it comes to non-duality, so I see myself as a separate. So then in the mind, it's like, well, if that's how I see myself as a dual individual, a separate self, then there's this other thing, there's this other experience or understanding of being a not self, a non-person. And so I guess what I'm trying to argue in this case is that non-duality is saying that there is no not person in a person. So the fact that you believe there's thoughts that go through your brain that I am separate, I am unique, I am special, that is seemingly happening. There's this body sense of this is who I am. That seems to happen. And that isn't excluded by non-duality. And the easiest way I can explain it is if you were to say everything is relative. Okay, so what does that mean? Everything's relative. So my relation to who I am is in relation to you. So you are other, I am self. You are you, I am me. So there's that relationship. Everything is relative. And so you can kind of take that idea and say, well, there is no absolute truth. Okay. So if everything's relative and there is no absolute truth, let's say that's what I believe, which isn't necessarily true. And I'll explain why. So everything is relative. There is no absolute truth. That statement in itself is an absolute truth. So the duality of saying that everything is relative, everything is dualistic, is saying an absolute truth, an infinite truth. Anything you want to say, you can say it in different ways, but non-duality is saying there is an absolute truth and there are relative truths. They're all contained within the idea that they're not separate. They're not two things. And so duality is false because it's claiming that everything is relative, but there is an absolute truth and that everything is relative. And if you look over that over a period of time, so if you take the idea of dualism over time, this is where this point is really clear, because if there were no time, nothing literally would be happening. And by happening, I mean moving. And so dualism, the idea of a separate self, the concept, the consciousness, the belief in reality is predicated on the belief that things are separate and things are constantly in motion. Nothing ever stops. And so if nothing ever stops, if everything is in constant motion, then every identity of what you call a solid object or a separate self is always in flux. And so if everything was in flux, then it is nothing. And that's, I guess, I'm not an expert on logical thinking, but if everything is moving, there is no solid identity that ever forms because it's constantly changing. So right now I am this animated human body talking to a laptop, and you're sitting on your side listening. That's what's happening right now. But over time, I'm going to die. And what my body is going to be turned into something else. It's not what I see it being now. And so this form, even from moment to moment, in this sense of motion, animation is constantly changing. So the definition, you can never point your finger at and say that's true, that's solid. And so over time, since everything changes, nothing exists essentially. So there is no self and object, because that is constantly changing. And so absolutely everything changes constantly. And so there is no constant ultimate duality, because that is always changing. And so it's like, well, is everything infinite, and is everything unchanging, or is everything moving? Is everything dualistic? That's another question that comes up in these types of talks. And you can use you can perceive it in your mind. That's a great thing about human consciousness and having a neocortex and having abstract thinking, is you can think about these ideas abstractly. And so the idea is that you can picture, if nothing was moving, there would be nothing to have a thought that it was separate. And so ultimately, if time stopped, there would be no perception of separation, because it would be everything. And the same thing with, like I just said, with time constantly moving, there is nothing that can be something. And so the idea that everything is absolute is, it's absolutely moving all the time. But the stillness, the peace of non-duality is pointing that to the truth of non-duality, that there is an infinite, there is nothing, everything. There is an empty fullness, and that's kind of what non-duality is talking about. So hopefully that made sense. If it didn't, it doesn't really matter. Shlomo says, but there are different points of view in this one reality. I see and feel inside this one, and you also, and you feel reality in a different way. Okay, but there are different point of views in this one reality. I see and feel inside this one, and you also, and you feel reality in a different way. There are multiple people feeling differently. Yeah, how all is one. Okay, so I think how I would respond to that is, I think we limit our thinking of what consciousness is, what points of view really means. And so the perception of who I am as a separate self, my personality, my ego, however you want to say that, is kind of at the most outermost level, or superficial level, if you want to conceptualize it like that. And so within that are all these other pieces of consciousness, these other pieces of awareness. And so we always, a lot of times, focus on human consciousness and the idea of understanding that I am, or that I exist, whereas other inanimate objects or animals or plants don't necessarily have this higher level thinking, abstract thinking of I exist and I'm aware of my existence. And so I think how I would put it is, yes, there's different points of view, but it's not limited to my point of view versus your point of view. It's everything has a point of view. Everything is in relation. Everything is connected, if you will, in the sense of oneness. or state of being one, or state of being not two. And so the cells in my body, the molecules, the atoms, they're all interacting with one another. They're all, in a sense, conscious in a way that they can relate to something outside of their reality. And so the point of view isn't me over here, you over there. It's literally everywhere. It's in, and so some people say, call it aliveness. Like everything is literally alive in this moment. We're creating this reality. If I talk about memories of the past, it's literally like being created in this moment, a moment that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because it always exists. And if you talk about trying to be in a moment, trying to be present, you're always trying to be something that you always are, but you're not. I'm gonna grab one thing. I gotta grab my phone because I was gonna read a comment from one of my videos and talk about that. So hold that thought. Or don't hold the thought. All right, so let's pull up YouTube. And I want to thank everyone for joining, asking questions. Keep asking questions, but right now I'm going to get into a comment from one of my videos and kind of talk a little bit about that at this point in time, and hopefully it'll be something that'll add some value to all of you listening right now. Okay, so since this is a public comment, I'll just say Mallory wrote in a comment to one of my videos. I won't read everything, but I'll kind of just pick out the part that I'm going to comment on. The more I sought, the more I saw everything is meaningless. The path brought me to quit a nihilistic perspective, and it seemed there was nothing I could do to stop it aside from back away from the path until I could have a healthier and more integrated view of life. Got to the point where I couldn't take my inner monologue seriously at all, as I saw it as meaningless illusion. Can you speak to experiences like these, brother? I admit the concept of predestiny has probably been the biggest culprit for my reacting in this way. Do you believe in free will at all? So I think that's kind of what I want to talk about, is I think, people don't come to non-duality to really gain anything, because you already have what you are. Not two. So Mr. Bombastic says not two. Daryl says how all is one. The ocean wave analogy applies here. Yeah. So yeah, that's another analogy. We can talk wave particle or ocean wave. The wave is a part of the ocean. So those are things that connect with people from a kind of metaphorical standpoint. And it makes sense, but ultimately the separate self, the ego, whatever you want to call it, steps in and says, well, okay, but I feel myself as being a wave, and so I don't feel like I'm part of the ocean, or that sort of thing. So there's a sense of never being a part of the oneness. And so talking about this idea of, so I guess to respond to Mallory, how I would put it is, if you get into any sort of, let's just talk spiritual practice, it can become, in a sense, a belief system or a religion. And so non-duality, what the mind, what your intellectual mind, egoic mind wants to do is make it something that you can accomplish something with, make it a bar. It sets a bar of something to try to achieve. And so if you start getting into non-duality, I guess here's a story I'm going to tell. It's maybe true or not, but here's what how I'm going to describe it as, if you get into non-duality, and you start to think, okay, you start to believe, okay, you have experiences where it makes sense, you have an understanding of non-duality, but then all of a sudden that becomes yet another thing that you're trying to achieve or trying to live up to, I think is a better way of saying it. So you want to become non-dual, you want to have that experience, that understanding forever. And so as you go throughout your life and you go to work, you do all like mundane type tasks, you want to make sure that you're always non-dual, because if you're not non-dual in that moment, if you're distracted, if you're not present, if you're not in the moment, then you're somehow living a lie, you're living falsely because you're not non-dual. And so the mind comes in, the intellectual thinking comes in and says, you have to be a certain way. You have to think a certain way. And so what ends up happening, I think, at least here's how I experience, in my experience, here's how I would put it is, let's say you want to become non-dual and you're thinking about someone said something to you at work or at school, and you kind of got a little offended. So it's going on in your mind, like, I can't believe this person said it to me. You know, why would they act this way? And then, oh wait, I have to be non-dual. So there's an awareness that these are just thoughts. This is not me. This is just thinking. This is it's fine, but why am I keep thinking about it? Because I want to be able to control my mind and be at peace, but these thoughts continue to pop up in my head about why this person said this to me, and it was kind of offensive, or I kind of got pissed about it. Like, why do I keep thinking about this? And then it's like, well, I want to be more, I want to be non-dual and feel at peace, but I don't feel at peace because I'm bothered by it. I've got this feeling of kind of frustration or anger in my belly, and it's something that I don't really particularly like. And that's not non-dual. But wait, that whole thinking is a thought about being non-dual. So that in itself is yet another thought. And so that's just another thinking. The idea that I have to be non-dual is just another thought. So I want to be more non-dual. And then let's say you're walking down the street, or let's say you're driving a car, and this whole time you're observing your thoughts and you're thinking, I shouldn't be thinking about that, but I should be thinking about that because those are just thoughts. And the idea that I should be non-dual is just a thought. And as you're driving your car down the street, you're like, oh, I was totally not paying attention to the road. What if I accidentally ran over something? God forbid I ran over a chipmunk or something like that, or a small animal, like, because I was so engrossed in thinking about trying to be non-dual, what if I ran over something? But obviously I didn't, because I would have heard the thud. And so, but why am I thinking about this? Because I'm non-dual. I shouldn't be thinking at all, because none of this matters, because thoughts are meaningless. And so why am I thinking about this? But so what? Yeah, I ran over a chipmunk or a squirrel or something, but what if something would have happened to me? Like, for real? Like, what if I would have veered off the road, or someone would have walked in front of my car and I hit them? Like, my life would have been, oh my, so changed, because I'm sitting here thinking about trying to be non-dual, but it's all in my head, and I know that it's in my head, but I'm observing my thought. But why am I observing my thoughts? Because I'm supposed to be more non-dual. But so what if, but I'm thinking about my thought about hitting someone with my car. And so, like, when does this ever end? When am I going to stop thinking? Because now I'm thinking of a thought, and this is making me crazy. Why is this happening? I want to be more non-dual, and now I'm still thinking about non-dual and trying to be non-dual, and I'm observing the fact that I'm just rambling here, and I'm observing my thoughts, but now I'm sitting here focused on being non-dual. So does that sound like a lot of fun? Is that what you want to try to achieve? I mean, obviously you can think you can see yourself as your thoughts as meaningless, but that essentially becomes the thing itself trying to get out of what it is. And so like the separate self trying to understand non-duality, or trying to become not a non-dual, or become enlightened as a separate self, and that's impossible essentially. Let me take a pause here and read. Shlomo says, I can understand that all the world with its 5 channels, 5 senses that I feel is one. But on the mind side, I think every person feels this one reality differently from different points of view. Yeah, exactly. I agree, Shlomo, says Daryl. Yeah, so everything has a different point of view, essentially. So your mind wants to, if you're trying to use non-duality to achieve something or become something or arrive at something, your mind can play all these tricks on you. And so it's really it really knows how to take what you think you believe or what you find peace with and find another way to disrupt that peace. And so the mind is constantly working. And I think if you take non-duality as a belief and try to use the mind to understand it, then all these other games, all these other tricks come into play. And so the idea that your thoughts are meaningless is coming from the thing in itself that has no meaning. And so you're trying to find become non-attached to your meaningless thoughts by the thing that is attaching itself to those thoughts. And so another way to look at it as is a lot of times if you meditate, or if you're just aware of the thoughts going on in your head, you can objectify those thoughts and make those separate from who you are. So then you can disidentify from thinking or those thoughts and say, well, that is something and that's not me, because there is an observer of those thoughts. And so what can end up happening seemingly is that we don't attach or identify with those thoughts. Now we're attaching ourselves to the observer of those thoughts. And so the observer isn't the observer as far as like this bedspread is observing, these blinds are observing this wall, la pared is observing. It's that it's your awareness, your focus, your separate sense of conscious. So we use words, we use higher level thinking, and so we identify as that thinking. And once we stop identify as thoughts, as words, there is still this sense of being a separate self that is observing those thoughts. And so the way to kind of see it from a non-dual perspective is the observer is the same thing as the separate self. When you unattach from your thoughts, that which is seeing those thoughts is still the same thing, is still what you're trying. It's not the ultimate observer that everything is. It is your separate self's functioning awareness, consciousness, focus on. So essentially what happens in that case is that you disidentify from the thoughts, and then your whole focus becomes on those thoughts in and of themselves, and you identify with this observer of the thoughts as being yourself, but that's also not you. And so this whole theater of trying to become something else, there is always something else that you are, because what you're thinking you are is not that, if that makes sense. And so let me just read, got a couple more comments here. Shlomo says, Daryl, I see the analogy and understand it, but what I cannot see is that each person seeing this one from his point of view, from his body mind, how it differs from solipsism. All right, so I can't comment on that because I don't know offhand what I know. I've heard of it, and I probably at some point read about solipsism, but that is not something I can comment on. So that's maybe something I'll look into later. But as far as predestiny, the concept of predestiny being the biggest culprit, I think what I would say to that is this conundrum of fate versus free will, or predestiny versus choice. That is a concern of the separate self, of the one that thinks they exist. And so it's really an attempt to try to take the individual will and make the individual will the ultimate universal will, the will of God, essentially. Instead of realizing that the will that you have, that the will that you are, is God's will, is the ultimate. And so what the separate self wants to know is, do I have control over my life? Do I actually make choices? Do I have power? It's the sense of power. And if you as an individual feel like you have power, then in a sense, the only way to have power is to connect to that universal. If you believe you're a separate self, then you're going to feel small because the universe is big, and you're going to feel disempowered. So if you believe the thought that you are separate, that you are unique, then life's going to feel like one difficult ride. And you can look at it this way. We as individuals want to feel like we have power over what happens. And so if we want to believe in fate, then it's something that we want to believe in. And you can take that as well, I don't have to do anything. Like, what's the point? I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. So what do I do? Like, if everything just happens, I can't change it. What's the point? And use that as a separate self to believe something and to not just be as what is. And so it becomes another thought form that you attach yourself onto to say, everything is fate, everything is predestined. So I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. I'm going to live my life a certain way. And so it just uses that as another way to prescription as to how you should live your life. And that's just using it again as another story, as another thing that you tell yourself to feel more comfortable and to knowing how you should live your life. But that's just another story. And the idea that we have free will, in a way, it kind of separates this idea of being in balance, being in tune with what should be, if you will. That if you go outside of the ultimate will, then you're going to find pain because you're out of balance. So, and yet, with that thinking, it's still one of those things where, as someone who has free choice or free will, I can choose to be out of balance or not. And so ultimately it's trying to seek to find what is that balance, what should I be doing, what is, but the balance is implied. And so there's nothing that you should do. As being manifest, the key to your freedom is in that. It's already, in a sense, predestined that you are free, if that makes sense. But what we're trying to do as a separate self is take the idea of fate versus free will and make it something that we can use or something that we can believe. And if you think you have free will, it's a really bad magician's trick, because I can say I have free will to raise my hand and a free will to lower it, but it's just, in that sense, like, what did you really accomplish? Because if you can't control your thoughts and they just seem to pop in your head, like, how much control do you really have? And it's like, the analogy I would use is if you say, oh, I've got this new mobile app, you should check it out, it's called non-duality, or no, it's called free will. Oh, okay, let's see. So you download the free will app from your app store, and you hit it. Once you get it downloaded, you hit the button, and all it does is pull up a black screen. It flashes a black screen for like 1 second, and you're like, okay, well, what did that do, or what else can I do with it? Well, yeah, that's what it does. It flashes a black screen for a second. It's like, well, I can't do anything with that. That's a dumb analogy or not, but the whole point is that we can do these tricks. Well, I have free will because I can say, I'm going to lift my hand, I'm going to lower it, I'm going to lift my hand. But then if you really dig into it and you look into it, that all just falls away as like a silly little child's game of like, oh, I've got free will, so I can do this. Well, do you have free will if you get hit by a bus? Like, did you choose that one? Because if everyone has free will, who has free will? Because, do you have control? It's a control thing over your reality, over yourself, other people, and your experience. All right. Shlomo says, who is creating this world, even if it is illusion, this 5D movie? If it is me, therefore this is kind of slops with no. Okay. Who is creating this world, even if it's an illusion? I would just, a simple way of saying it is, I would say it is you who is creating this world, but it's not the you believe in. Shauk says, so settling in what is happening and seeing my part as part of the whole. So settling in what is happening and seeing my part as part of the whole. I guess there is no settling in. I mean, it is, we making, social media is a good example of how this works. Is, we try to have control over our experience, over what happens. And so it's kind of the idea, when I start making a video and I just start, I lose my train of thought, or I just start babbling, I'm like, well, this isn't going well. I hit stop and then I start recording again. And it's the same thing with people that take 20 selfies to get the right one to post, because they want to make sure it's the right angle and the lighting's good and that they look great. And so that's how we try to have control over what is happening. And so what is happening is what it is. There's no do-overs. That's why I like the live talks, because whatever comes out is what happens. And if I try to cut some perfectly produced video that has the right wording and everything seems to make sense, maybe I'll get more views, but at the same time it's a little bit of a red herring, because it's showing you that reality is a certain way, and having the blooper reel is good to kind of show people that life comes as it is. In this movie, reality that I feel have something to say, or is it random? Oh, okay. Did I feel I have something to say, or is it random? Well, that's, I think when we talk about reality being a dream or a movie and being a character, it's kind of like that, but that can be another way to that's another way to see it. It's another story, if you will. So like saying that this is just a movie and that there is no point, I'm just a character, I'm not real, it can be used to disregard the value of the story of the creation in and of itself, if that makes sense. Shog, nice app. Yeah, I should make that. Shog, you says yeah. So not settling, inverse, not escaping. Yeah, well, exactly. And so oftentimes we use ideas to either fight against something, escape. It's the whole idea of fight or flight, or use it for something that you can benefit. And so then this just becomes yet another thing like that, as opposed to just pointing out the thing that we're always doing, that in every moment that kind of clouds the clarity of what is. So we're actually we're almost to an hour. I guess I had a lot to say today. If, like I said, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. If you have any other final questions, we got a couple minutes here. I appreciate you guys, all of you, sticking through this video and participating. If you have any comments or questions after the fact, feel free to leave them. I guess pretty soon I'll be going to collect some wood so I can build a fire and sleep under the stars. And you know, well, thank you, Daryl, for participating. Shaug says, sounds great. We'll go a full hour here, so I still got a minute and a half. So maybe I should just sit here cross-legged and stare deeply into the camera. I think that means that I'm more non-dual, because if if you see speakers that do that and they stare into the camera and just kind of allow themselves to be and not be concerned the fact that people are watching them, then it's supposedly, I guess, more non-dual than if you're not comfortable with that. But imagine if you were in a public situation and you just went up to someone and just like, how uncomfortable that would be. And I think a lot of people do get uncomfortable if you are present, if your stuff is allowed to flow, if you don't believe your own BS and you're fully present with other people, it can feel uncomfortable for them because a lot of people don't want to be seen. Your separate self doesn't want to be witnessed because you see it for what it is, and that makes people uncomfortable. Daryl says, you owe my 1 hour to do this. Yeah, I don't know what you meant by that, but if you haven't become more non-dual by the end of this video, if you're not fully non-dual, then I think you failed. Oh, we got Phil. Phil joined us here real quick. Phil says, "Is this all just a dream? It seems real, but like the dream at night. It's exactly the same substance, but perceived differently." Um, that's a good question. So we dream at night, and oftentimes we forget the details. In the moment, it seems real, um, but it's a different experience, but it is the same substance. I think, to put a cherry on top, or to put a bookend on this, I would say that when you are aware of your innermost workings, your thoughts and feelings, if you observe that in a meditative kind of sense, then I would say that, well, oftentimes we see the inner workings, the inner world, the outer the outer world being of physical nature, inner world being non-physical. We see that as two separate things, but I guess I would say that instead of separating those out as inner versus outer, if you see all of it as outer, then it kind of makes sense in a non-dual way as far as your dreams, your thoughts, your feelings, everything that seems to be non-material is external to who you are. If that makes sense. So you're not internal, and then everything is out there in the physical sense. You are behind everything external and internal. That's who you are. Shark said, so used to hide that we feel weird being with people who don't. So used to hide that we feel weird being with people who don't. I'm not sure. Can you clarify, Shao? I'm not sure what you mean by that. I finished my coffee, so I think we're almost done. Don't worry, there are organic beans that I grew myself, and I ground them myself and used water from the creek, pure mountain water. That's how I made my coffee. And in a ceramic coffee mug that I made myself. You said people stop hiding non-dual people. You said people stop hiding non-dual people. I'm still not sure what you're meaning by that, but that's okay. I'll give you one more chance here. Maybe it's just I'm too dense this morning. I need to do more hikes through the forest and swim naked in the river. Yes, people feel weird being with honest people. Yes, I agree. It makes people uncomfortable, and if you don't have a dog in the fight, and if you're present with people and you're open to their experience, yes, it can be uncomfortable because most people feel comfort in the contact, in the separation, and so being in people's space makes people uncomfortable. So I appreciate your time. I could probably talk all day, but I'm going to move on to harvesting my berries. So till next time, peace. Thanks for everyone for participating.